Stratification is one of the important factors that determine the structure of an ecosystem. So in terrestrial ecosystem, we can see the stratification or the layers of the distribution of plants in a forest. Pond ecosystem consists of autotrophic components, heterotrophic components and the decomposers. We had mentioned 4 components of an ecosystem. What were the 4 components? Production or productivity, next decomposition, then energy flow and nutrient cycling. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to today's session on chapter 14 of 2nd PUC, that is ecosystem. I am Dr. Divya, biology faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So we all know that ecosystem is the functional unit of an environment wherein different organisms thrive depending on one another in order to maintain a balance. So this lesson deals on the different aspects of ecosystem. So to begin with, let us first understand what ecosystem is and what are the different categories that are there in an ecosystem. So the ecosystem is divided into 2 basic categories. They are the terrestrial ecosystem and the aquatic ecosystem. So anything that is there on the land forms the terrestrial ecosystem and anything on the water forms the aquatic ecosystem. So the terrestrial ecosystem includes the forest, the grasslands and the desert. The aquatic ecosystem includes the pond, lake, wetlands, rivers and estuaries. And apart from this, both in the terrestrial and the aquatic ecosystem, there are natural ecosystem which exists as such and there are ecosystems which are man-made. So the man-made ecosystems are crop fields. So crop fields is one such terrestrial ecosystem which is man-made because it is created by cultivation of crops by a human being. So therefore crop field is a man-made terrestrial ecosystem. And an aquarium. So aquarium that we have at home with beautiful plants in it and fishes in it, that is artificially made by man. Therefore, because it has water, it comes under the aquatic ecosystem, and because it is made by man, it comes under the artificial man-made aquatic ecosystem. So let's study about the structure and function of the ecosystem. So the structure of the ecosystem, when we look at the structure of the ecosystem, say take an example of a simple forest. We can see stratifications. What do you mean by stratifications? Stratifications is nothing but layer. Because do you think that in a forest all the plants are of the same height? No. The taller trees will occupy the higher position forming a canopy. That is, they cover the entire area. Next to it comes the shrubs, next to it comes the herbs, and in the herbs again there are smaller plants which are ground level such as the grasses, then comes the mosses or the bryophytes. So like that in different layers the forest is arranged or the ecosystem is arranged. Or let's take the example of a pond. In pond also we have the first layer where only the phytoplanktons and zooplanktons are present. The second layer we find the fishes. The third layer we find the benthic organisms or the sedimentary organisms, right? So likewise they have different stratifications. So stratification is one of the important factors that determine the structure of an ecosystem. So in stratification usually there is vertical distribution of different species. That is true, right? It is vertical distribution. The higher trees, next level of trees, next level of plants, next level, like this it goes on. So there is vertical distribution of, so this is nothing but of species. This is stratification. So these species, they occupy different levels. So here you can see a photograph wherein you can see the taller plants at one level. Next to that you can find the herbs or smaller trees. Herbs or shrubs or smaller trees will be found. Then you can find the ferns here. Below the ferns you can find the grasses. And then you can find the mosses. Like this, in different level, the forest area or the terrestrial ecosystem is made up of. So that is an example. So the best example we can take for stratification is trees that occupy top vertical strata forms one layer of the forest. The shrubs form the second layer of the forest. The herbs and grasses occupy the bottom layer of the forest. So first layer is formed by the tall trees, next formed by the shrubs, then we have the herbs, then comes the grasses. After the grasses, again we can find some mosses, lichens, like that different stratas will be formed. So therefore, the vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called as stratification. So therefore, stratification defines the structure of an ecosystem. So let's study what are the components of the ecosystem. So the components of the ecosystem is seen to function as one particular unit, and in that particular unit it is made up of the following aspects. One is, we can see productivity in an ecosystem, we can see decomposition in an ecosystem, we can see the flow of energy in an ecosystem, and also there is nutrient cycling in an ecosystem. So productivity, decomposition, energy flow, nutrient cycle, all these come together to form one unit, and these are the important components or aspects of an ecosystem. So if all of these are functioning in a balanced way, then only the ecosystem will get balanced. So let's study about these one by one in the coming sessions. That is, under productivity what happens, under decomposition what happens, under energy flow what happens, and nutrient cycling there is carbon cycling and phosphorus cycling. All that we'll study in the coming sessions. So moving further, I told you the ecosystem is of two types, that is terrestrial ecosystem and aquatic ecosystem. So in terrestrial ecosystem, we can see the stratification or the layers of the distribution of plants in a forest. What about an aquatic ecosystem? So we'll understand about aquatic ecosystem, wherein it consists of the rivers, ponds, the oceans, the seas, all that which are natural, then estuaries, the wetlands, all that which are natural, and the artificial one, that is the aquarium, which is man-made. But in your syllabus, they have mentioned particularly and to study about aquatic ecosystem, wherein taking the example of a pond ecosystem. So we'll see how does a pond ecosystem look like. What are the components in a pond ecosystem? Let's look into. So a pond is nothing but a shallow water body. Shallow means it is not that deep. So such water bodies are called as pond. It is a shallow water body in which all the four basic components. What were the four basic components? Productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling. All these four basic components of an ecosystem are present, or they are well exhibited. And it is made up of, the pond ecosystem also consists of abiotic components and biotic components. Let's study what they are. So the abiotic component, abiotic means the ones which do not have life. Biotic means the ones which have life. So abiotic components of pond are water, and in that water different dissolved inorganic and organic substances that are there, and at the bottom of the pond the sediment that is there. What is a sediment? It is nothing but made up of rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. So all these forms the abiotic components, that is water, the dissolved inorganic and organic components in the water, and the soil that is deposited at the bottom of the water or the pond. So these forms the abiotic components of a pond ecosystem. Next, the solar input, the cycle of temperature, the day length, and also other climatic conditions are also the abiotic components which regulate the function of the entire pond. So these do not come under the pond ecosystem, but these are some of the abiotic components which will determine how the biotic component has to survive in the pond. So therefore, these are also few of the important aspects in a pond ecosystem. That is the amount of sun's rays that is being received by the pond, the amount of temperature the water is of, and the day length, that is how much duration the light is received by the pond, and the climatic conditions. All these will decide the function of the entire pond ecosystem, wherein all the biotic factors of a pond or biotic components depend on these factors. So there are some autotrophic components in the plant. So let's study about the stratification in a pond. So the pond is also made up of different layers. So here there are some autotrophic components. What are autotrophic? Autotrophic means they are the ones which are capable of synthesizing their own food, right? Plants are autotrophic. Animals are heterotrophic. Hetero means they depend on other organisms for their food. So let's study what are the autotrophic components in a pond. So the autotrophic components includes phytoplanktons. Phyto means plants, and these are the small plants that float on the surface of the pond. They are called as the phytoplanktons, and these phytoplanktons, they contain chlorophyll pigment in them, and that is why they are capable of synthesizing their own food, and hence they are called as the autotrophs. So we have some of the algae which are floating, submerged, and some marginal plants found at the edges. So if we consider a pond, we have at the banks of the pond, there are some marginal plants that are there. Then there is on the water level, on the surface of the water, there is some algae which are floating. So algae they are nothing but the phytoplanktons. So all these are the autotrophic components. Autotrophic components, and there are some plants which are submerged at the bottom as well. So these are also autotrophic. So what are the autotrophic components in the pond? They are the plants which are capable of, or the plant components which are capable of synthesizing their own food, such as the plants which are present at the edges of the pond, the plants such as algae which are floating on the surface of the pond called as phytoplanktons, and those plants which are submerged at the bottom of the pond. So all these are the autotrophic components because they are capable of synthesizing their own food. So after the autotrophs comes the heterotrophs. The heterotrophs are the consumers because they are the ones which make use of the autotrophs, which feed on the autotrophs to produce energy. So what are the the consumers are represented by the zooplanktons. So these zooplanktons are nothing but the heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, because they depend on the autotrophs for their food. So the zooplanktons are nothing but they can be free swimming or they can be bottom dwelling forms. So what are the components? So we have the autotrophic components such as the plants, autotrophic components. So we have the ones that are completely submerged. Can you see here? The submerged plants are there. Then we have the floating ones. Then there is the ones that are present at the edges. All these are autotrophic components. So apart from this, there is presence of zooplanktons. These are the heterotrophic components. Zooplanktons which can be floating or zooplanktons which can be submerged. Submerged organisms. Zooplanktons which can be at the top of the pond, on the surface of the pond, or ones that are submerged. So these zooplanktons, they are heterotrophic components of the pond. And next after that, there are some decomposers that are present. So the decomposers that are present in the pond are the fungi, that is the microorganisms, the bacteria, and also certain flagellated organisms which are usually dwelling at the bottom of the pond. So at the bottom of the pond, what are there? Decomposers are also there. You cannot find decomposers on the surface of the pond. It is found only at the bottom of the pond, and it consists of bacteria, fungi, and some flagellates. So these are the ones that are found at the bottom of the pond. So therefore the pond ecosystem consists of autotrophic components, heterotrophic components, and the decomposers. So this system, all these, the autotrophic component, the heterotrophic components, the decomposers, all these come together forming a unit, and all the functions of the ecosystem and the biosphere are performed by these three components that are there in the pond, and they are responsible for the conversion, especially the decomposers are responsible for the conversion of inorganic material into organic material by using not just the decomposers, even the autotrophs as well. So the plants are also capable of converting the inorganic material into organic material, wherein they'll make use of the radiant energy or the energy released by the sun, and these will be, so it forms a cycle here, a nutrient cycle is being formed. What happens? The plants will receive, so from the sun's rays, from the sun's rays, the plant will receive the energy, they will photosynthesize, they will convert the inorganic components into the organic components. These organic components will enter into the heterotrophs when the heterotrophs feed on these particular plants. And next, when these heterotrophs decompose, that is when they die and decay, which is a process called as decomposition, they add mineral and dead matter to the soil. They help in mineralization of the dead matter to release them back. So that is what happens. So in an easy way we can learn here. The sun's energy or radiation is utilized by the autotrophs, which are the green plants, and these green plants are eaten by the heterotrophs, that is the zooplanktons. These heterotrophs, when they die and decay, they add minerals to the bottom, of the pond. These will again be used by the plants. These minerals will be used by the plants, and the plants will grow. Again, the plants will make use of the sunlight. Like this, the nutrient will cycle. The nutrient cycling takes place in a pond. So it will be reused by the minerals will be released back to the soil, that is sediments of the pond, which will be reused by the autotrophs, and these events get repeated, and this particular event is called as the nutrient cycling or the energy flow. The energy flows, right? The energy is flowing from the sun to the autotrophs. From the autotrophs, it is flowing to the heterotrophs. From the heterotrophs, it is flowing to the bottom of the pond. From the bottom of the pond, again it is flowing back to the autotrophs. So like that, it will circle in a pond ecosystem. And this flow of energy or the nutrient cycle is always unidirectional movement of energy towards the higher trophic levels, and its dissipation and loss as heat to the environment. So don't think that all the energy will be utilized. Some of the energy will also be lost to the environment here. Some of the energy will be lost. So every time the energy moves from the higher trophic level to the lower trophic level, the energy will be lost, and the flow of energy is always unidirectional. That is, it flows only in one direction. That is from autotrophs to heterotrophs, from heterotrophs to the soil in the pond, then from the soil in the pond back to the autotrophs. So that is how it moves in a unidirectional manner. So in a pond ecosystem, let's study about, or in ecosystem in general, let's study about what productivity is. Because productivity is one of the important components of an ecosystem, right? We had mentioned 4 components of an ecosystem. What were the 4 components? Production or productivity, next decomposition, then energy flow and nutrient cycling. So these four let us study in detail one by one. So first starting with the first component of the ecosystem, which is productivity. So under productivity, the name itself suggests to produce something. So productivity is usually seen in the autotrophs, right? So here productivity, let us study about the different types of productivity. So productivity is of two types, primary productivity and secondary productivity. So primary productivity, primary production or primary productivity is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter which is produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. So here I told you productivity is seen in autotrophs. So autotrophs are nothing but the plants. Here plants during the time of photosynthesis, how much energy they utilize and how much out of that energy that is utilized, some amount of energy is lost. But what is the remaining energy in that area? Say for example, in a pond ecosystem. In a pond ecosystem, there are a number of autotrophs or plants that are present. So all these plants together in that particular given area during over a time period, how much energy they have produced. It is called as primary productivity because the first energy that will be produced is by the plants, right? So therefore it is called as primary productivity. And primary productivity is usually expressed by using the units, weights, that is in grams, and energy, that is in kilocalories. And the rate of biomass production is also called as productivity. So how much amount the plant produces. So when we take the weight of the plant, what the weight of the plant is, that will show the productivity of that particular plant. And how much biomass or organic matter is produced at a given period of time by that particular plant will give the primary productivity of that particular plant. So as I told you, the primary productivity again is of two types here. One is gross primary productivity, that is GPP, and the net primary productivity. So productivity is of two types, primary productivity, secondary productivity. Primary productivity is again of two types, the gross primary productivity and the net primary productivity. What are these? Let's look into. So gross primary productivity. So gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is defined as the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. That is, during photosynthesis, how much amount of organic matter is produced. So after a plant photosynthesizes, if you take the weight of the plant, what is the weight of the plant in terms of grams? So that weight, if you measure, will give you the gross primary productivity of that particular plant. Considerable amount of GPP is utilized by plants in respiration. So whatever primary productivity or gross primary productivity is produced by the plants during photosynthesis will be utilized during respiration, because during photosynthesis carbon dioxide will be produced. That carbon dioxide will be made use during respiration process, and therefore there will be a change in the gross primary productivity during the respiration process as well. Next, talking about the net primary productivity. So net primary productivity is the available biomass for consumption. So we all know that the plants during gross primary productivity is nothing but how much amount of organic matter is present in the plant when you're weighing the plant after a process of photosynthesis. Now that plant will it utilize all the energy? No. Some of the energy will enter into the plant and some will be given back to the environment, right? Now the heterotrophs that are there, that is the zooplanktons or the animals that are there, they will feed on the autotrophs. So when they feed on the autotroph, what is the available biomass? So how much amount of energy is left in the plant at the time the animal is feeding on the plant will give you the value of the net primary productivity. Understood, right? Gross primary productivity means overall how much energy the plant has produced, that is the gross primary productivity. So once the energy is produced, some of the energy would have been lost. So remaining energy that is there, how much has been utilized by the heterotroph, that is called as the net primary productivity. So net primary productivity is the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs, that is, be it the herbivores or the decomposers as well. So, gross primary productivity, there is a formula for gross primary productivity, what it means. So, gross primary productivity, or there is a formula to calculate net primary productivity. So, how to calculate net primary productivity? So, to calculate gross primary productivity, there is no calculation anything. You just need to measure the amount of energy that is there in that particular plant and the weight of that particular plant. It will give you the gross primary productivity. But for net primary productivity, there is a formula that is used, because from that gross primary productivity, some of the energy would have been given back to the environment, therefore decreasing the energy and also the weight of the plant. So, at that time, the measurement you need to take. So, therefore, gross primary productivity minus the respiration losses is because some of the energy is utilized during the process of respiration. That is when energy is given back to the environment. Therefore, respiration losses is the net primary productivity. Therefore, net primary productivity is equal to gross primary productivity minus the energy that is lost during the process of respiration. So, this calculation will give you the net primary productivity. So, talking about primary productivity depends on what type of plant species is inhabiting that particular area. It also depends on the variety of environmental factors, that is, how much amount of nutrients is available, because the growth of the plant is also determined. So, primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. So, how much plant species is there in that particular area, depending on that, the primary productivity will usually change. And apart from that, there are also various other factors which change the primary productivity. So, it also depends on various environmental factors, such as how much amount of nutrients is available, because the growth of the plant also depends on the nutrients that is available to the plants, right? So, that is why. And also, how much is the plant capable of photosynthesizing, because sometimes the plant may not be in complete sunlight. It may be in a shady area. So, there also the primary productivity will tend to change there, and therefore, primary productivity varies depending on the different type of ecosystem it is in. So, in a desert ecosystem, it is completely different. In a pond, it is completely different. In a forest, it is very, very high. The primary productivity is very, very high. So, therefore, depending on the ecosystem in which the autotrophs are or the plants are, the primary productivity tends to vary. So, the annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere is considered to be approximately 170 billion tons of organic matter. So, that is how much amount of net primary productivity is produced by the plants in the entire biosphere. And of this, despite occupying about 70% of the surface, the productivity of the oceans are only 5 billion tons. Why is the productivity of oceans only 5 billion tons? Because in oceans, the availability of the autotrophs is very, very less. So, that is why. Though ocean occupies, land area is less, ocean area is more in this earth, right? But in spite of the ocean area being more, the primary productivity of the ocean area is very, very less when compared to the primary productivity in the land area. Why? Because in oceans, the amount of autotrophs that are present are very, very less. So, that is the reason. So, next, talking about the secondary productivity. So, we learnt about primary productivity, under that the gross primary productivity and the net primary productivity, and the factors which influence the primary productivity, all that we studied. So, next we'll move on to secondary productivity. So, secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers. So, the consumers will feed on the autotrophs. So, when they feed on the autotrophs, some amount of energy will enter into the consumer. So, once it enters into the consumer, that is the herbivores, those herbivores, how much energy they will have, what is the weight of that will give you the secondary productivity. Say, for example, we have the herbivores which feed on the primary productivity. So, they feed on the primary productivity, that is the plants or the autotrophs. These are the secondary productivity. So here when they feed, some of the energy is lost from the herbivores into or the heterotrophs into the environment during the process of respiration. Here also some of the energy would have been lost and only a little energy would have entered here. Once it enters here from this particular heterotroph also, some of the energy would be lost to the environment, and also some of the energy is lost when they during the process of digestion, during the process of defecation, during the process of urination, some energy is lost. So after all that, how much energy is left in the consumer, that is in the heterotroph, that will give you the secondary productivity. So always remember, primary productivity is for the plants, the autotrophs. The secondary productivity is for the animals or the heterotrophs who feed on the autotrophs or who feed on the producers. So this is about secondary productivity. So I hope you understood the session well, wherein we dealt with the different types of ecosystem, the aquatic ecosystem and the terrestrial ecosystem, and wherein we studied about the pond ecosystem, and also we studied about the different components. Under that, in detail, we studied about the first component of the ecosystem, that is productivity. In the coming session, let us study about the other components of the ecosystem, wherein we'll study about the next two components, that is decomposition, and one more component, that is the third component of the ecosystem, energy flow. So we shall meet again in the coming session. Thank you.